time we just used 360.
I'm trying to do everybody.
That's okay.
Hello everyone, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Just to make sure that you can hear me, just someone can write yes or no, and you can follow the presentation as well. Perfect. Great, thank you. So my name is Dima Falla. I'm knowledge management consultant with the public finance and local governance unit at the UNICEF headquarters. First of all, I want to thank everyone for your interest in this exciting topic and for taking the time to join the webinar. In terms of today's agenda, Matthew will open the presentation introducing the concept of public expenditure review and a summary of the experience from the broader literature on this topic. Then we will give the floor to Sudha Sharma, Chief of Health and Nutrition from Tanzania Country Office, and she will talk about the Tanzania experience on nutrition PR. After that, we will have Alexander Lazovsky, Social and Economic Analysis Specialist from Macedonia Country Office, and he will discuss about the experience in a child-focused PR in Macedonia. Having heard UNICEF experience, we will then invite Mr. Leif Jensen and his colleague from the World Bank to present the BOOST initiative and experience in BOOST-supported PRs. And finally, we will open the floor for discussion. So, to keep us on a timely schedule, I will signal to the presenters when only 1 minute remains. I hope the presenters will forgive me, since I'm sure the participants are very keen to ask questions and share their feedback. In this webinar, we will try to answer to some of the key questions, such as what is a PR, why UNICEF is engaged in PR exercises, what are the specific bottlenecks that the PR is seeking to address as well, what were the main challenges and opportunities in carrying out the PR. And in addition, during the open discussion session, we hope to flesh out some of the less tangible questions, such as why was the PR selected over other options compared to child-focused budget analysis or public expenditure tracking surveys, etc. And how to manage some of the inherent risk associated with doing a PR. How did the country office decide to get involved with the PR, and also what responses were adopted to meet the challenges. So before we start, I want to quickly go over a few housekeeping items and let you know how you can participate in today's webinar. At any time during the presentation, you can submit questions or comments by clicking on the text box on your link screen. We will be reviewing them as they come in, and they will be addressed during the discussion session after the presentation concludes. Due to time limitation, we may not be able to answer all the questions, but we will follow up on PF4C committee of practice if they are common. During the discussion session, if you would like to make a statement, please indicate this by sending a message in the text box. We will then activate your microphone so that you can intervene. And one last note, if you're not speaking, please kindly mute your microphone so that background noises are not transmitted during the presentation and discussion. Now, let's start with the webinar and hear from Matthew on overview of UNICEF experience with child-focused PR.
Thanks, Dima, and hello, everybody. It's great to be with you this morning, or this afternoon or evening. My name is Matthew Cummins. I'm part of the Public Finance and Local Governance Unit here at UNICEF New York. And today I'm going to give a brief introduction into public expenditure reviews, as well as talk about some of UNICEF's experiences with PERs from a global perspective. So what is a public expenditure review, or PER? Well, a PER tries to analyze the allocation and management of government resources. And many of you either joined us last month or received the materials that we distributed on the global stocktake of UNICEF's work in the area of public finance for children. And one of the key takeaways from that assessment was that more than 100 UNICEF country offices are engaged in what are called child-focused budget analyses. And in these situations, a UNICEF country office is looking at a sector or cross-sectoral budget to identify what spending is being directed toward children. And it's important for country offices to understand that a PER is much more than this more rudimentary budget review. Not only is it looking at patterns over time, it's trying to understand how spending is connected to different types of outcomes. If we step back, we can see that in general, there's two objectives to a PER. The first is to identify how to improve the efficiency, effectiveness, and equity of spending. And this evidence base is then used to inform strategic planning and budget preparation processes. Now, the coverage of PERs varies considerably. And we're going to see from UNICEF's own experiences, some PERs will involve looking at multiple sectors, typically social sectors, education, health, and social protection, whereas other PERs will look at a single priority sector like nutrition, social protection, or roads. It's important to understand that PERs take into account three kind of high-level areas. The first is budget processes. So a PER is interested in understanding how a budget is put together, how it's approved, how it's implemented, and monitored. A PER is also interested in understanding the connection between overall policy and expenditure decisions. And lastly, PERs are looking at the political, legal, and institutional frameworks that may impact how a budget is put together and transformed into goods and services. Now, when we approach a PER, it's important to understand that we're both looking at past spending as well as projected future spending. And typically, we're looking at the past 3 years of expenditure performance. And moving forward, we're looking at usually the 3 upcoming years, which typically corresponds to the medium-term expenditure framework. And if we look at general PER structures, we can see that they typically look at 3 different categories of expenditure analysis. The first is fiscal discipline, the second is strategic prioritization, and the third is value for money. So in terms of fiscal discipline, some questions that a PER might try to address looking at past performance is, were all available allocations spent? And from the Global Stocktake report, one of the key findings that emerged from country office annual reporting was that one of the major bottlenecks is that many line ministries are not fully expending the available allocations. And so a public expenditure review will try to understand the different elements that were causing the underutilization of existing allocations. In terms of looking forward, a question that a PER might ask is, what can we afford to do and what can't we afford to do? In terms of strategic prioritization, which is also known as allocative efficiency, looking backwards, we can ask questions such as, did expenditure correspond to strategic objectives? So we can look at sector plans, cross-sector plans, we can look at PRSPs, we can look at national development plans, and we can try and see how the spending actually corresponded to these higher level policy objectives. We can ask, did expenditure finance activities that could have been supplied by the private sector and other actors? And we can also try to understand how expenditure actually affected outcome indicators. Looking forward in terms of allocative efficiency, we can ask questions to see how can we better align spending with strategic objectives, And could we possibly change how resources are allocated to have a bigger impact on overall outcomes, which would involve changing the composition of things like capital spending versus wages, and also looking at how the distributional impact of geography. Lastly, looking to value for money, also known as technical efficiency. Some questions that a PER may ask looking at the past performance was, is it possible or was it possible to deliver the same output more cheaply? And moving forward, a PER is going to ask questions to understand how we can achieve cost savings, such as by contracting out different services, choosing different service providers, improving existing processes, and so on. Now, the World Bank has developed a very robust literature on what defines a good PER. And so in these next two slides, I'm just going to summarize some of the key characteristics of a good PER. So a good PER will begin by identifying the rationale for public intervention. And we shouldn't take for granted that the government should be delivering a specific good or service. We need to look and to make sure that there's the right mix of public and private goods and services. Second, a good PER will look at not only how the money is spent, but also where the money comes from. For example, if an immunization program is being debt financed, we want to make sure that the financing mechanisms are sustainable over the long term. So we're not just interested in expenditure, but also the revenue side. A third characteristic of a good PER is that they evaluate public expenditure priorities. So again, a budget is finite, and we also have a variety of distributional objectives, and we want to make sure that how money is being spent is aligned with a certain set of priorities. A good PER will also examine the link between expenditure inputs and outcomes. And one of the key takeaways from the literature is that we don't need to have fancy, robust analyses. Now, while it is important and often helpful to align budget data with household survey data to assess outcomes, that's not always needed, especially in situations where data is very scarce and that's just not feasible. And so what the literature shows is that anecdotal evidence, case studies, focus group discussions, and other qualitative approaches can provide good evidence and help policy recommendations. Moving on, good public expenditure reviews also focus on institutional arrangements, which includes political incentive. And it's important to recognize that the budget is inherently a political tool, and decision makers are driven by a variety of different incentives. And so a PER will try and understand what's driving decision-making processes. The last two characteristics involve how a PER is designed. And clearly, it's very important that government has ownership of the process, because ultimately the recommendations are geared towards affecting decisions taken by government counterparts. And it's also very important to be as participatory as possible and include a wide variety of diverse stakeholders. And this can include political leaders in the ministry at the national level. This can include technocrats at regional and local levels. This can include interviewing personnel who are working in local facilities, as well as getting information and consulting the end users and the beneficiaries. Lastly, a good PER will offer very specific, actionable, and feasible recommendations. It's important to keep in mind that there is no general prescription for the level or composition of spending. And although neighbor and regional analyses and comparisons can be helpful, there's no overall benchmark that we're aiming to achieve, and these will be very country-driven. And related, there's also no set structure to design and carry out a PER. A PER should be tailored to a country and sector or sectors situations. So who works on PERs? Well, a PER tool was developed by the World Bank, which became commonplace in the 1990s, and the bank has implemented PERs in hundreds of countries involving all sectors. Today, many institutions participate in PERs. It includes bilateral agencies like DFID as well as UN agencies like UNDP. And of course, the topic for today is, UNICEF is increasingly being involved in PERs. On the screen is just a snapshot of some of the examples of UNICEF's recent experiences, both of PERs that have been led and managed by UNICEF, as well as where UNICEF has been a partner, oftentimes with the World Bank. And this year we have 6 country offices that we've identified from headquarters that will be planning or implementing a PER. So why should UNICEF be involved in PERs? Well, going back to the findings from the stocktake of UNICEF's work in public finance activities, it shows that budgets and PFM processes are increasingly identified as a main driver of disparities among children. And so if UNICEF can work and develop a good quality PER, it can generate information that will affect budget decisions and processes, and ultimately help to increase the transparency, the efficiency, the equity, and adequacy of public spending on children, which are the higher level objectives of UNICEF's engagement in public finance. So what do we mean when we say a child-focused PER and UNICEF's role there within? Well, the purpose of a child-focused PER is the same as any general PER. But the child focus tries to ensure that children are not overlooked in the analyses and that they're actually featured and prioritized. One of the main features of a child-focused PER is that it recognizes that children can be affected by direct and indirect channels that are linked to the design and implementation of a budget. And on the screen, I've highlighted just 4 general areas that a child-focused PER would try to highlight when looking at a budget. For example, how would a sector budget affect the access to goods and services for disadvantaged populations, including children? How would sector or cross-sectoral spending affect prices, including of basic medicines, foodstuffs, of transport, which would have spillover effect to accessing educational facilities? In terms of looking at the revenue side, what is the impact of a proposed tax reform on disposable income? For example, if a government were to decide to introduce a child benefit and to finance that by a value-added tax that increased goods on basic goods and services, the net impact of that could actually be adverse to poor families and children. And so a PER would try to identify an issue like this. A PER would also look at how changes to social protection provisions, such as pensions and subsidies, would impact children. Another area is looking at employment and wages and how, for example, a public employment scheme would affect the disposable income of families and children, or how the wage bill would affect both the quantity and quality of frontline workers. Much of the work around child-focused PERs involves benefit incidence analysis, where we're looking at the share of spending on different groups. And so we can try to estimate how spending is affecting children under 1, children under 5, how spending is affecting children of school age, how spending is affecting the whole gamut of children from 0 to 18. We can see how children in different geographic regions are affected by spending. We can look and see how children who are of a minority status or who have disabilities are being are benefiting or being excluded from spending. And oftentimes, to bring in the child focus, we have to go out and get child-specific information because budgets are not designed with specific codes that would tell us how money is being spent on different age groups. So we have to introduce different types of information through facility surveys, through focus group discussions, etc., to try and bring in and develop the child angle. So what is UNICEF's value added to a public expenditure review? Just very quickly, UNICEF has an on-the-ground presence and an understanding of the pressing issues that are faced by disadvantaged populations, including children, and this can offer insights, especially qualitative of nature, which do not necessarily emerge from budget data and can help to prioritize PER analysis. UNICEF clearly has convening power, and we can ensure effective relationships through partnerships with civil society, private sector, and a variety of government partners. Drilling down to the government, obviously UNICEF has a long history of close relationships working with sectoral ministries, and increasingly we are working closely with finance ministries. Just as an example, in many countries in East Asia, UNICEF is actually financing a body that sits inside the ministry to help bring in the child angle to public financial management processes. And so we can help to bridge sector and finance ministries through PER exercises. And lastly, UNICEF has a culture of innovation, of integrating a child focus into mainstream methods and tools. And just over the last 2 years, we've seen a variety of innovations which have been piloted and scaled up based on SMS and cell phone technology, which is soliciting information from local facilities as well as beneficiaries, which can be channeled into PERs to strengthen the overall analysis. Before we turn it over to the country offices, let me just conclude by highlighting several implementation considerations. Clearly, from the global perspective, data is one of the biggest challenges that we have. And this can involve a variety of reasons. For example, governments sometimes don't want to share data. We have poor record-keeping or unformatted or unreliable data. At the local or subnational level, budget data can be very difficult to access, and this is oftentimes where a lot of child-focused services are delivered. If we're trying to look at the direct impacts of a child budget, then we have to develop a methodology or a weighting system to identify and measure, which can involve a variety of technical challenges. In terms of time and money, the PER varies quite considerably. So the quick and dirty PERs UNICEF has worked on have taken as little as 6 months and cost under $30,000. And longer PERs are more robust, such as carried out by the World Bank, can cost more than $250,000 and take more than 1.5 years. That should actually be 18 months. Qualified personnel is can also be a challenge because we're looking for experts who have expertise in PFM issues as well as children's issues. And lastly, working with governments and partners. In terms of governments, PERs can be politically sensitive as well as perceived as critical of line ministries. And with partners, we have to policy recommendations. For all of these different considerations is that UNICEF's recent experiences have shown that our relationship increasing presence at the subnational level is increasing our ability to get budget data. There are a variety of innovations, one of which we're going to hear from the World Bank shortly about Boost, which can reduce the time and cost of performing a public expenditure review. At headquarters, we are now putting together a roster of experts where we have identified personnel the right profile to work on PFM and children's issues and which can support them in this area. We have a lot of experiences of positively working together with the government as well as with partners around accessing data and working together on PERs. Many of these considerations will be further developed by the case studies that we're about to hear in Tanzania. And we will also have the opportunity to hear from the World Bank, which will discuss the Boost initiative, as well as how we can join hands at the local level to team up around public expenditure review exercises. So without further ado, back to Nima Falah, who will introduce the next presentation. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Matthew. So because of the time limitation, we directly move to the first presentation. Would be Tanzania Country Office. Sutha, can you hear me? So let's see. So I guess we cannot hear from Tanzania. If Alexander, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe you can start presenting first, and then we go for Tanzania after that.
Okay. So I'll just. Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Alex Lazowski. I work as the Social Protection Officer here in the office in Skopje. I hope that everybody can hear me well. So basically, I'll make a short presentation with the experience that our office had in developing a public expenditure review. Let me just briefly say a word or two about the country context. Well, in the period when we were conceptualizing the PER, the country was showing modest but positive economic growth rates. On average, GDP grew by some 3.5% a year during the period between 2003 and 2006. So from a growth perspective, this period was positive as it increased employment opportunities, although high unemployment remained an important challenge. One of the main premises we had to consider at the time was the fact that poverty was quite a relevant problem. Some 30% of the population was living in poverty in 2007, for example. And the problem of poverty was especially bad for children because almost 60% of households in poverty had children. In that sense, it was very important for us that the analysis within the PER provides some insights into the options for improvement. We're especially interested in the government's fiscal space to take effective action against poverty and social exclusion. And this was particularly the need for children who were and still are more than proportionately affected by poverty. It is important to mention that prior to the public expenditure review, we did a comprehensive child poverty study. We published this one in 2007. This study pointed out to some major disparities, particularly education and ECD. Nima, I see comments here that people are complaining that they cannot see the presentation. So, I mean, it looks fine from where I'm looking at, but okay, I'll just continue now and hope that everything will be taken care of. It's also important to mention that at the time, the decentralization process of devolving authorities from the central government towards the municipalities was just being initiated, and decentralization played and is actually continuing to play a critical role in the financing of basic services for children. This is because it was exactly the functions in the three social sectors with more direct impact on children that were being decentralized. These were, of course, education, health, and social protection. And our PER was particularly interested into these three sectors. So this decentralization process was seen as an entry point, a possibility to improve inequities which existed at the time. So I'm moving to the next slide now on the purposes and objectives of the PER. In our case, the main purpose was to highlight the relevance of raising the visibility of the poorest and most vulnerable groups of children in public expenditure. So it included specific observations related to how public expenditure was addressing or not addressing the needs of these children. In addition to this, we were interested to point out the linkages between the areas in which child outcome indicators were faring well or needed improvement. And in that way, we hope that the review will contribute to strengthening the overall effectiveness of public expenditure for children. In this context, the PER aimed to provide some baseline data and assess how budgets were allocated and spent on social services for children and their families, paying a special attention to resources addressing the needs of the most disadvantaged groups that were identified in our previous study on child poverty. The review also provided an overview of the budget cycle in the country with timelines and stakeholders involved at the different stages of the process. And I think this was done with the purpose of pointing out the different moments in which influencing the budgetary process can have the most impact. Finally, the PER's objective was to underline that investing in children is good public policy and that it made political sense. This means that an analysis of a country's budget from formulation to execution and monitoring its public expenditure performance can help ensure that the government's financing goals are consistent with their declared policy objectives and that the financial resources allocated to priority areas are spent adequately. More specifically, the government at the time was showing its commitments to pursue the fulfillment of children's rights through a number of measures, and the PER was presented as an instrument to help basically to help the goal to ensure the goals of these measures are back to you. Can you hear me?
Sudha, can you hear me?
Yeah, it's fine, better.
You can start.
Ask Sudha to speak.
But she cannot hear me.
So we can hear her, that's all that matters.
Yeah, she can change that, but we cannot hear.
Tell her we can't hear. We heard her just a second ago.
Sudha, we cannot hear you.
The mic, everything is full.
Okay, now it's good now.
Oh, you can hear us now?
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, I think I've turned the pictures down. Maybe the internet is not good enough.
Okay.
Can you hear us now?
We can hear. Can you start again, please?
Okay. Hi, everybody. This is Sudha, and I have Biram with me from Tanzania. So we would like to share our experience of public expenditure review for nutrition. Can you hear us, right?
Yes, thank you.
Oh, good. So in Tanzania, you know, the nutrition status in children was poor, with stunting affecting 42% of under 5 children, and it's just lower by 2% since 2005. And malnutrition was contributing to a third of child deaths, which accounted to 130 deaths every day as a result of contribution by nutrition factors. So there was a national nutrition strategy and a well-defined planning and budgeting guidelines, but despite that, the situation was not so good. So we tried to do a public expenditure review, and I'm so glad to hear Matthew's presentation, because most of the things we did was in line with the standard description that he made. which included, following the procedures. Basically, the objective was to address the lack of data on the amount and type of funds allocated and spent on nutrition. So we wanted to have baseline information on allocation and expenditures on nutrition against which to assess progress. Then we also wanted to assist in providing inputs into the national budget guidelines, which then helped building capacity of national and local authorities to plan for nutrition. And we wanted to align donor support with the national plans. The three major stages in this project was, first of all, there was a big government ownership, because the whole issue, the whole task was coordinated by the Ministry of Finance. And we had contracted an agency called Innovex Development Consulting. How come? Can you, sorry about that. Then we did a desk review of existing data for budget execution. And we had a field phase in which we sampled 15 randomly selected local government authorities, central government, including the various ministries, departments, and agencies, development partners, non-governmental organizations, and CSOs. And then later we had an analytical phase where we looked at the data. So the main findings of the PER was that in terms of nutrition funding, the budget allocation was increased during the last fiscal year, but total nutrition investment at the national level was inadequate. I would like to share some data. Like the National Nutrition Strategy has something like 520 million for 5 years. But what we actually found was for the central level, only about 51.4 million were spent over the last 3 years. And 78% of this funding came from development partners, and a little more than 22% came from government. So although there was an increase in nutrition budget, there was a big funding gap. And we also saw that the public spending on nutrition was poorly aligned to strategic objectives. For example, a lot of money was spent on legislation and advocacy kind of things, rather than going directly to children. And when you talk about the local councils at the district level, the councils did not have enough budget to implement at the local level. So that was also a big challenge that we found. So the main recommendation that came out of the PER was that nutrition funding should be ring-fenced. And as you know, in Tanzania, the health sector has a basket funding mechanism. So there was a suggestion that there should be a nutrition basket as well. And that should be ring-fenced so that it's spent on nutrition. And also, we follow a formula for equitable allocation for health resources, for health funding. So it was suggested that even for nutrition, there should be a formula for fund allocation so that the distribution is equitable where the need is. And also, it was recommended that nutrition funding should be a protected item in budget guidelines. So a percentage should be allocated. It's already a budget code, so they said, okay, using this code, there should be increased funding and it should be protected. And also now the recommendation was we should have a more definitive resource mobilization strategy because of the funding gap. And in terms of capacity building, now the government has recruited several nutrition officers, in fact one in each district. So these officers need capacity building, and also the main Tanzania Food and Nutrition Center, which is the coordinating body, needs more strengthened capacity for research and also to guide the local government authorities to implement nutrition activities. And partnership and coordination was continued to recommend as a key point to be taken forward, and monitoring mechanism for nutrition was addressed as another recommendation area. So in terms of what we did after the PER was that an action plan was adopted, which was discussed then widely among all the stakeholders, with a plan to be implemented between 2014 and 2016. So it says the action plan recommends that at least 80% of the resources, which was in the original National Nutrition Strategy Implementation Plan, that should be mobilized, hopefully, by 2016. The aim is to have around 300 million from donors, in dollars, and about 125 million from government of Tanzania. And the plan also has high impact nutrition interventions, rather than giving money ad hoc to certain program components. As per the priorities set by the National Nutrition Strategy, we should be focusing on more high impact programs, high impact interventions. Then the institutional capacity building was another recommendation out of the action plan. So I think these are key results. They're looking at the enabling factors. There's a lot of disturbance. Can you hear me? Hello? Hello, can you hear us?
Yes, we can hear you very well. Continue.
Yes, we can hear you.
So in terms of UNICEF's role and partnership strategy, we said, okay, we need to fund the PER exercise for all of the consultant coordination work. Going forward, if any of the countries are interested to do this, I think one of them would be, a main component would be the coordination and participatory approach for the PER process. Then, training, which was done for the data collection at the LGA level, the local government level, as well as at the central level. So then UNICEF continued to provide guidance during data analysis and supported the action plan for PER. So for the UNICEF and other partners going forward, I think these are all of the key activities that we need to consider as enabling factors. One of the things is around planning and timing, which I have not mentioned in the slide here. But in Tanzania, the process was greatly delayed because sometimes the Ministry of Finance people would not be available because it was their budgeting time. And sometimes for UNICEF's own programmatic issues, we could not find the time for all the donor coordination and so on. So timing and planning is critical. It took us a long time, almost a year, but the lesson learned is if you think of all the upcoming activities and factor in budget sessions and so on and so forth, then you can actually do it in a shorter time, which is around 6 months. Then also in terms of national ownership for Tanzania, the whole process. The technical committee was led by Ministry of Finance, and the whole process was coordinated by Ministry of Finance with UNICEF, with the engagement of a consultant. And we have in Tanzania what we call a high-level steering committee on nutrition, in which key development partners are represented, along with the Prime Minister's office, which is the main leader in the National Nutrition Response, and all the permanent secretaries of all the line ministries. So they are represented in the high-level steering committee. So high-level steering committee kind of, guided the process and then finally approved the PR results and the recommendations as well as the action plan. So the national ownership was very strong, and which is what we would recommend going forward for other countries also. In terms of stakeholder support, yes, we need other stakeholders as well. But in Tanzania, one of the key success was because we engaged the consultant agency, Innovex, who were already doing a lot of things for the government and also had a good reputation among partners. One of the challenges is to get data from the partners. So Innovex was, in that sense, very capable, and they could follow up thoroughly and get the data. So having a reliable partner is also very, very important. And for challenges, especially data was a big challenge, as has been highlighted by previous presenters also. This data was scanty, the quality was not very good, record keeping was mostly poor in the local government authorities. So those were the challenges. And for NGOs, sometimes they did not want to share data, and sometimes they did not have data. And also, there was a potential risk of duplication, because if the NGOs reported something, the donor also would have reported. So maybe there was a possibility that you would count both, but in fact there were one donor contribution going through the NGOs. So that was also kind of a challenge where we have to really see how we minimize duplication. So that was another challenge for us. But going forward, the lessons learned was the training was key, and then also the involvement of the National Nutrition Working Group for the preparation of the work plan. In Tanzania, the Tanzania Food and Nutrition Center, key partners, we have a technical committee on nutrition in the whole health sector swap approach. So whole of the technical committee and all the partners were involved. So I think this kind of engagement of all the partners is very, very important. And what we felt is, although we had sampled only 15 local government authorities, but for future, now having sensitized everybody, if we want to do this, maybe the councils could self-fill all the tools, and maybe we can get a wider representation of nationwide data. So that was another lesson learned for us going forward. Did I miss anything? I think that was it. That was the last slide we had. And thank you for listening, and we are open to any questions. I have Biram also with me here, and both of us will be very happy to take any question if you have. Thank you.
Thank you, Sudha, for a great presentation. Because of the time limitation, we're going to directly move to the reaction to UNICEF experience from the World Bank colleague, and also to hear the overview of Boost initiative. So, Liv, can you hear me?
Not very well. So can you say it again? Oh, the cost itself. Can you hear us? Hello? The cost. Hello. We spent something like 145,000 for
can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can't you hear us? Can you not hear me? Can you not hear me? I don't know what's happening. I think I'll just put here. Okay. Okay, yeah. So the costing in terms of the PER exercise was $145,000, and we also spent something like $80,000 for the dissemination. We have done dissemination at the central level as well as the regional levels. So dissemination also was factored in. So $80,000 for dissemination, $145,000 for the PER exercise, including the the action plan development process. Dissemination of the PER results. The whole report. If you can see me, I will just try to show it here. So see, this is the report we have. This is the report we have, and there's a smaller one also. See, it's quite a thick report, which is what we had taken, and then we have also prepared like a smaller policy brief, which is what we presented. So this is the small extract, the policy brief, and then the whole report. So we had presentations at different levels.
I'm sorry, but we have to interrupt you to move on to the World Bank presentation. And after they conclude, we'll have a chance to go back for you to respond to the questions that are emerging. Is that okay with you?
No problem.
Okay,
no problem.
fantastic.
Thank you. Thank
hey,
you.
Wife, if you can hear us, we just unmuted your microphone, and we're going to load up your presentation right now. So it would be fantastic if you could start.
Don't worry about the load. Fix the audio first. Why is she not talking? Why is he not talking? I think we got up this waiting for that.
Live, can you hear us? Please present. Please present.
No, like just wrote a message saying no, like we can't write. No, we can't hear you.
Hello.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Can you hear us?
You.
Tell me hear him and he can start.
Go ahead.
Yeah, you can start.
Okay, I can start now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Hello again. This is Leif Jensen speaking. I'm the bank-wide PR Boost coordinator. And with me in the room, I have Mimi Volde, who is a data specialist, also working on PERs and on Boost. As I mentioned, but I think you didn't hear me. I said in the interest of time, we'll be very brief. I just provide a few comments on the Macedonian and Tanzanian PERs we saw, and also briefly introduce you to the Boost tool. I think my first comment would be that what you're doing here on more topical and sector-specific PERs, like on nutrition or child-focused, is a trend which we have also seen in the bank. We have, in an increasing extent, PERs on agriculture, climate change, education, health we have had for a while, judiciary sectors, and also sub-national focused PERs. So I think my first comment is indeed welcome very much what you're doing here, and and it's much in trend with what we're doing at the bank. Please keep the PowerPoint where we are now. I just want to make a couple of points on the 2 PRs we saw. In addition, everything you mentioned in the opening presentation on the 2 PRs, that's certainly challenges which we know here. On the data, it's the same. Data are scarce. Data quality is pretty low. We also have issues on engaging with the government. We have issues on the PER. It takes too long, too costly, and so on. So the initiative we're briefly going to introduce you to now was actually meant to address some of those, say, PER efficiency as a process, some of the PER efficiency problems. We'll do very briefly the first slide you have here, a brief introduction to the tool. If you turn to the next slide. May we have the next slide, please? Yeah, thank you very much. The Boost tool is a PER analytical platform where we try to improve the quality of public expenditure analysis. We organize and interface line item treasury data for analysis. That is the core point of the Boost database, with a view to pull forward data from the treasury in agreement with the Ministry of Finance, of course. We pull these data forward, we organize them and clean them up, so to speak, and make them readily available for analysis. And the next one is that it's a new approach to collecting, combining, analyzing, and sharing the data. It's a shift away from one-off desk and task orientation to a more sustained, joint expenditure data set of high granularity. If you take the new approach and you look a little bit to the 2 PRs, which we just heard on Tanzania and Macedonia, you took a lot of time to get the data issue around the data issues. You continue to have a lot of data quality matters sitting, be that at the subnational level, be that at the national level. And it actually did constrain a lot, I would expect, the time you had allocated for analysis at the very end. I think the Boost tool is a kind of trying to provide some answers to those problems, which we also see. Let me emphasize that. Everything what we've heard here is actually experiences and problems we're seeing across the bank and PRs as of today. If you take the next slide, what is a Boost data base then? Next, yeah, thank you. It's a cube of expenditure data covering 3 main dimensions: the administrative level, the economic type level, and the function program. If we take child-focused PERs, that's something which is very, very difficult to identify in this cube. What are actually coming from the admin level? Do you have a ministry of children? Probably not. So it sits in different ministries and agencies. It sits at different subnational level. Do you have a function program on child-focused efforts? Eventually, to some extent, but what we saw and also heard from Macedonia, from the first presentation you gave us, it touches on a lot on prices, wages, project programs. It touches everything in that cube. So the first challenge you are running into when you look at child-focused PER is actually to define that log frame. That is, what is the grid you want to have in this a tremendously broad cube. The other one we heard on nutrition, that's to some extent a little easier in the sense that it's a program. It's probably a program which is having a clear owner in the administrative structure, and it's probably also a program where you can a little easier look into what kind of expenditure type do you have. So the nutrition PERs at the outset would probably be somewhat easier than looking at the child-focused PERs. If we take the next slide, once you then have the data cube on expenditure established, then get a very broad PER also on the child-focused one. If you take that as a case, you have to reach out to improve the granularity of the data on, say, capital expenditure, on pro-poor, which was also mentioned for equity analysis, bring in the revenue data. You then next probably would like to have some household data, population data, do geo-mapping on urban-rural expenditure allocations, and finally, which is extremely important on the child-focused PR, you want to have sector data on input, performance, and outcome. So to establish that, if we take Macedonia again, and also to take the Tanzanian PR, it takes a lot of time, extremely time consuming. It's very difficult to get the right and high quality data, and it's very difficult to actually having stakeholders share the data. I think what we've seen from the PR, and here I'm reaching a little bit out to the brief we also shared before the event today. What we're seeing is, to a large extent, that once we get to this point of having an integrated policy platform, it can then, to a large extent, be available for the development partners and the teams in the specific countries. In some West African francophone countries, we have used the Boost as a joint between the development partners data set, and where the development partners then can do more granular and sector-specific analysis. I think my final comment, and then turning it back to you, Nima, would be, okay, can UNICEF then immediately piggyback into or be part of the close to 50 Boost countries we have prepared so far? I think the answer to that question would be a little hesitant, and my first part of it would be no. The reason being that very often, for the first 1 or 2 years, a Boost is developed as an internal tool for the government. The government needs to see what it is, they need to have the ownership, they need to understand the actual structure and composition of the database before they are in any event ready to share the data. So where we have Boost open data, where the government have put them out on an open budget portal, surely there you would be able to access them, and we can help you providing links to those already publicly available. My second question then is, most of those Boosts which would be publicly available, they haven't been constructed and confined for the purpose of doing child-focused DERs. So my recommendation to the teams on child-focused DERs and nutrition going forward would be to identify your log frame, your understanding of how you want to capture, and the metrics, how is it defined in the public expenditure, the specific area, be it on nutrition or be it on child-focused. Once you have that, then you're better able to have a more standardized view on which data do you want to have, and can you eventually get it up on some more standardized data platform, country by country. I think, and that's my final comment, if you are able to get a Boost up running, you will have a lot of good benefits and opportunity from that database going forward. It's not easy, but in our view, it's worth the investment. Yeah, thank you very much. I'll turn back to Nima.
Thank you, Liv, for your feedback and also presentation. At this step, I guess we're gonna receive all the comments, questions from the participants, and we will try to address the questions. If you have any questions, you can write in the text box in the link page.
Because yeah, we should present the Boost as well. No, it's not going to. Just time. But we haven't yet a moment to discuss.
If I should respond on the key challenges mentioned with the reference in Togo and Niger,
so the floor is open for the questions. You can type in your questions and comments here for both Macedonia, Tanzania, and also from our colleague from the World Bank. We have one question here from Lesotho to Life. The boosts are tested in some countries. What are the key challenges on the boost initiative?
Yeah.
In Togo and also in Niger.
Yeah, okay. If we take the two countries there, the key challenges are more or less the same as we have heard from rather poor. It can take a while, actually, together with government officials, to get the data collected, to get the data organized, to get the data on the right format, so they can sit in a cleaned up database over years, so you can compare, make a time series within the cube we identified. There's a lot of back and forth and cleaning up of data, reorganizing, relabel, and so on, all technicalities to get the database constructed. That as part of that is also convincing the government that it's actually a good idea. It can be a little bit of kind of a black box coming out and showing that cube and say, you see here, hang on, we can get all your data organized within this cube. Just have confidence to us and we'll learn you how to do it. I think the lessons is that the more we get them on board from the beginning, and they sit next to us, and so to speak, is the left-hand side of all the data construction, the better. If you want to have them be able to actually handle and sustain the database going forward, they need to be there from the very beginning. Another challenge is a little bit that we are under strong pressure to make open data. There's a momentum on open data. Everybody is talking about it, open government, and so on. And it's very often you then forget there's a question of data quality. So if the open data running the process, you may be in some concerns of, is the data quality actually sufficient? And as we saw again from Tanzania and Macedonia, you need highly granular and very high quality data to answer those questions you actually had in your PR on the two countries, which, by the way, I found rather interesting and also indeed much at par also with what we see here in the bank. So congratulations on these two also.
Thank you, Leif. Any other question? Sudha, if you want to give comments.
There's not much comment except that I agree with what you said about the data availability, quality, and the kind of assessment that we need to do out of what's available. And also, it's sometimes challenging to see how much of this budget or the money that has been spent has actually gone to children and how much overall. So in Tanzania, actually an assessment was done which showed that out of the total spending, around 22% was identifiable and traceable to children, but the others were spent in things like staff costs, management, and so on and so forth. So in terms of looking at what goes for children, it's kind of challenging, and we don't have that disaggregated data to really guide us about the children's issues. That was one of the lessons we learned, that data is a problem.
Thank you, Sudha.
Thank you.
But this is not a question. So we have another question for both Tanzania and Macedonia. The question is, how long does it take to country office to engage with the Ministry of Finance? What was the role of bank and IMF in this process? If Alexandra, if you want to intervene.
Yeah, thanks for the question. And that's a very good question, I have to say, because when you prepare your office to do such a comprehensive exercise such as a public expenditure review, you have to factor in the time that you need to build this relationship with relevant factors. For us, it took a lot of time. Now, I'm not able to quantify that in exact months or years because it was a long time ago. But I have to say that we first had to work with the Parliament. So we did not start with the Ministry of Finance per se, but we started working with the Parliament because the Parliament is the one that usually adopts the budget. So we first had to work with them and to cultivate this relationship in which we explained what is the rationale behind, looking at the numbers related to children. So when we were able to make a point to parliamentarians, to members of parliament about the importance, and we were able to gather this momentum to initiate a review, public sector review, we then moved to the Ministry of Finance with the backing of the parliament that we already had. Of course, like my colleague from Tanzania said, and the colleagues from the World Bank pointed out, data is very difficult, but the key data is usually gathered from the Ministry of Finance. We were able rather easily to gather data related to allocations because we just look at the budgets. I mean, and we see allocations even per sectors. This is good thing. But expenditure, in terms of expenditure, it was very difficult for us. So basically, we were very dependent on the Ministry of Finance because at the time, the Ministry of Finance did not publish expenditure detail. They just published allocations, but not expenditure. So roughly, I think I can say it took us a year to build this relationship with the Ministry of Finance, so that we could actually engage jointly in this. The role of the World Bank, I think, is key because, I mean, traditionally, I don't know how it is in other countries, but here, traditionally, UNICEF is not seen as an organization or as a player who looks into, the financial matters of things. I mean, traditionally, governments see us or perceive us as somebody who, develops services for children, but they don't go into the nitty-gritty of the financial things. So, what helps us in Macedonia is this relationship with the World Bank. The World Bank understands the added value of the involvement of UNICEF in the public financial sector, and it can vouch, so to say, for our commitment and our quality or added value to participate. Nima?
From Tanzania's side, may I add a few remarks, Nima?
Sure, yes, please.
Yeah, from Tanzania's side, I think we worked very closely with World Bank and Ministry of Finance both. For us, developing that relation was not a problem because in Tanzania, UNICEF is a leading partner for nutrition. And Tanzania being an early riser country for Sun movement, even the highest level of political leadership is engaged actively. And this whole process was initiated as a consultative process in the Nutrition Partners Group, in the technical committees, and also in the high-level steering committee for nutrition. So once the country decided that we do need to have an expenditure review on nutrition, and especially to use that as an advocacy tool to attract more funding, I think bringing everybody on board was not difficult. So for us, the main difficulty was in terms of finding the right time for coordination. Within UNICEF also, although Health and Nutrition Program is overall custodian of nutrition activities, but the PER process was led by Social Policy section. And one of the key staff who was kind of coordinating this got a transfer earlier in the process. So the link with the Ministry of Finance was kind of broken, and until we could finally get the consultant on board, and we had a new manager also for the nutrition team. And that's when the process actually got a momentum. And sometimes because of the budget session, Ministry of People being busy, and sometimes our own challenges within UNICEF, I think finding the right time was a big challenge. That's why it took us a long, long time. But in terms of coordination, World Bank and us working together to give technical inputs, I think that was fairly easy for us here because we work very closely. Nutrition, World Bank was also a nutrition partner, and they were, in fact, then the chair of the Development Partners Group for Nutrition. So the nutrition colleague kind of talked with her other technical team within World Bank. Then we could all work as a team. So collaboration as such was very easy here because of all these existing structures and wider DP participation and wider government engagement. Over to you, Nima.
Thank you, Sudha.
Thanks, Sudha. Hi, everybody. This is Matthew here from headquarters in New York. I'd like to just quickly respond to Mona's comments on the challenges of undertaking a PER in the child protection sector. And it's an absolutely fantastic comment. And we know that it is very difficult to identify expenditures in this area because of the cross-sectoral nature on the one hand. And secondly, in most countries, the amount of investments that go into child protection are very, very limited. And so we actually have two recent experiences of where UNICEF has carried out a public expenditure identification survey rather than a PER, precisely to try and identify those pieces of the overall budget which are going towards the child protection sector. And we have one completed from Tanzania, which was conducted in 2012.
I know, someone is like going crazy.
Currently is also developing a public expenditure identification survey. And if you're interested in finding more information about that, we're happy to share information that we have here at headquarters, as well as put you in contact with the specific country offices that have been involved in this.
Nima, I would like to respond to a colleague from Burundi. This is Sudha from Tanzania. She's asking about how Tanzania included PER result in the social protection system.
Yeah.
As of now, we have not gone to that stage. In Tanzania, the budgeting session starts sometime in November because the fiscal year starts in mid-July or 1st of July. So any feedback resulting from this PER assessment will go in the budget going forwards, which will start early next year and end of this year. But as far as the social protection system is concerned, World Bank is supporting the government through a separate project called the Social Action Fund. And one of the components of the PSSN, the Productive Social Safety Net, is also kind of a conditional cash transfer where you need to avail some of the existing health and nutrition services. And one of the nutrition services is around information for infant young child feeding. So although not a direct contribution of PER, an element of nutrition has been incorporated in the social protection or the TASAF mechanism. So that's the answer for the Burundi colleague.
Thank you, Sudha. Alexander, do you have any comments on that?
Yes.
Final comments, actually.
Okay, so when it comes to this is relating to the question on social protection. Our PR looked into social protection closely, and basically we found some very interesting information when we did the PR. Namely, we saw that, for example, certain areas, certain institutions within the social protection system were historically having problems in getting sufficient funding from the government to operate, while we saw that certain other areas had allocated funding that they actually could not spend. So basically, the PR provided some recommendations to the government where reallocations could be done. So I think this was quite useful in that sense. But also, I think the PR motivated our social protection program within the country office in the sense that it identified some bottlenecks that then were investigated further with other analysis that followed after the public expenditure review. For example, when we did the PER, we saw that the cash benefit system, the system itself was, we saw some indications of flaws. For example, that some money was being drained from the system in certain cash benefits, while other cash benefits were underutilized. So this was a motivation to do a specific cash benefits analysis a couple of years later that pinpointed the exact problems that were inherent to this sector. Nima?
Thank you, Alexander. Can we give the floor to Live for the final comments? Live, can you hear us?
Hi, it's Mimi. Actually, Live had to run to a meeting. I mean, this has been a great conversation. As we said, we see a lot of synergies that we can learn from this experience. And we had actually put on a question up there if the colleagues in UNICEF would be able to code or identify child-related expenditure from transaction-level expenditure data. So it would be good to know if that would be possible.
Hi, this is Jing Chang from New York headquarters, UNICEF. Appreciate the question. This is the very same question that has been discussed at the recent UN CRC committee expert meeting in Geneva. It is clear to all the participants there that we need to be able to better measure, monitor, and track and child rights related spending. So the question very much comes down to, at least at the technical level, how one might be able to tag and measure children-related spending in a given government budget. What we have seen is that different countries, those pathfinders who have carried out such analysis, have had different experiences, and they use different approaches, and they, often in a consultative way with the national partners. We're now at a stage to compile such experiences and try to distill from these practical experience what's the best way forward in terms of coding, or we may call it tagging, child rights related spending within a given government budget, and taking into account the different challenges and opportunity existed in the public financial management system in a country. So we're hope to develop a technical methodology guidance note together with the key partners in the public financial management area, so that we can better assist our country offices and all the like-minded partners, child rights advocates out there to do better tagging and coding. So with the hope that someday we can hold governments better accountable to the Article 4 of the Child Rights Convention. Basically says the government is obligated to devote maximum available resources to achieving child rights. So we will approach, we have approach the World Bank colleagues and to see how we can better work together on developing such a methodology guidance. So stay tuned, everybody.
Thank you, Jinqing. So we need to end the webinar. And thank you, everyone, for participating in today's webinar. Big thanks to Macedonia Country Office and Tanzania Country Office, Sheikh and Duda, for presenting today, and also to our guests from the World Bank, Life and Mimi. So we recorded this webinar. We're gonna share it with you all after today, and also all the PowerPoint. Thank you. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nima. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. See you later.